Story 1. This story happened about 3 hours prior to writing this. My youngest brother, 9, and one of his best friend, 5, were riding around on their scooters in the area we live. Mind you, they were doing no harm to anyone or anything. They were just riding around and having fun like they usually do. My neighbor has her car parked halfway onto the pavement, which is actually illegal here in the UK because I have a heart condition, so I need to have my car right outside my front door. There are a few reasons why I think this is complete nonsense. 1. She bought a house with a garage at the back door. 2. She is outside, knelt down in cold weather doing gardening. My brother and his friend walk themselves and their scooters to the top of the hill and start to ride down it until this woman decides to stop them and proceed to shout at them for riding on the pavement near her car. From what I heard and what my brother told me, this is how it went. "Neighbor, do you mind? My car is right there, and you could scratch it with your scooter thingies." "Sorry, but we're allowed to ride here," my brother said. "No, you absolutely cannot ride those here. Use them on the road, further away from my car. There's moving cars on the road. We're not getting run over by a car because you want us to go on the road. If you go down this hill one more time, I will be calling the police." "Okay, fine, do it." My brother and his friend then proceeded to ride their scooters down the hill, past her car. The woman had actually got her phone out and was about to call the police until my next-door neighbor, my brother's friend's dad, and I walked up to her and asked what her problem was. She had told us that they were bumping into her car and scratching it, so she was calling the police on them. I checked around the car and no visible damage was there, so we told her that there was no reason to call the police at all. My neighbor ended up stopping her gardening and went inside. Story 2. Hello, I'm back with more stories about my grandmother. Feel free to check out my profile for more. This story is split into 2 parts. The first is about my mom and dad's wedding, while the second covers my dad's second marriage. The first part was told to me secondhand, but the second one I experienced firsthand. Let's begin. My parents' wedding. My dad was around 27, and my mom was 25. They had been together for 3 years and were ready to get married. However, my grandmother was not a fan of my mom from the beginning. A big part of it was that my mom didn't let her walk all over her, at least not entirely. Another issue was that my mom had been engaged before and wasn't a virgin, something my grandmother had a problem with, despite the fact that my dad wasn't one either. The trouble started when my grandmother ruined the proposal. My dad had planned to propose at a nice dinner party with family so that everyone could be there. My mom already knew about the proposal since she had picked out the ring, but she didn't know when it would happen. My grandmother decided it would be a great idea to spoil the moment by announcing my uncle's military deployment date right afterward, trying to take the attention away. It didn't work, and my dad scolded her later. However, throughout the dinner, she made sly remarks. First, she commented on the ring, saying it was too fancy, and that my mom was shallow for wanting such an expensive ring. "I've seen the ring, it's a simple diamond with a twist band, far from extravagant." When my mom didn't react to that, my grandmother moved on to criticizing her weight. The entire dinner was miserable, and when my parents got home, they barely spoke. The wedding planning disaster. From there, things only got worse. My parents wanted to get married within a year, mainly for financial reasons and because my mom wanted to start having children soon. My grandmother strongly disagreed. She thought they were moving too fast, and when my mom mentioned wanting kids, my grandmother suddenly declared that she was too old to start having children. She even said that if my mom really wanted kids, she should have stayed with her former fiancé instead of marrying her son. Keep in mind my mom was only 25 at the time, meaning she would be 26 when they got married. On top of that, my grandmother tried to convince her to quit her job, saying it would be easier for her to just stay home, especially if she wanted children. My mom ignored her and continued with her career plans. To avoid further stress, she also started ignoring my grandmother's phone calls and messages. That led to my grandmother having a complete meltdown and running to my dad, only for him to respond with a simple, "Okay." Her interference didn't stop there. During wedding planning, everything had to be her way. The church was never right, the arch was wrong, the wedding date was inconvenient, and the guest list didn't meet her approval. She tried to convince my parents to push back their wedding to accommodate her and her friends' schedules. When my mom refused to invite those friends, my grandmother threatened not to attend. Eventually, my parents compromised on some things, mainly the church since my mom wasn't particularly attached to one. However, my grandmother pushed for them to have the wedding at her own church. The issue? My parents lived in Michigan, while my grandmother lived in Wisconsin. Her church was tiny, meant for a town of fewer than 2,000 people. While my parents' wedding was relatively small, just family and close friends, the venue still wouldn't have fit my mom's side of the family. My grandmother complained and whined about it until my grandfather finally told her to be quiet and said he would attend the wedding without her if she kept arguing. Wedding dress shopping drama. When it came time for wedding dress shopping, my mom wanted soft, pale colors for the bridesmaids and neutral tones for the guests. The wedding party colors were pale greens and pinks to complement her dress. My mom's wedding dress was beautiful lace up with a puffy skirt, a flowing veil, a corset, and delicate, sheer sleeves. My grandmother was not happy. My mom hadn't invited her to go dress shopping not out of malice, but because she also hadn't invited her own mother, who lived in Florida. My mom only brought her bridesmaids. This infuriated my grandmother. How dare my mom not invite her mother-in-law? She made a big deal out of it, saying my aunt had never invited her to dress shopping either, which, honestly, makes a lot of sense in hindsight. She claimed she had always dreamed of picking a dress for her daughter or daughter-in-law. Then, she actually saw the dress. Her lips pursed, and her eyes widened. She immediately started tearing into it, saying it made my mom look inappropriate. She questioned why my mom would wear white, insisting she was lying to God. She even said the dress looked like it had been pulled from a trash bin, that it didn't flatter my mom, and that it made her look like a stuffed sausage. This nearly broke my mom. She was on the verge of returning the dress because she no longer felt beautiful in it. Thankfully, my other grandmother, her own mom, stepped in and put my dad's mother in her place. My grandmother, humiliated, went crying to my dad like a scolded child. My dad's way of handling her. My dad has always been the quiet, stoic type. His usual way of dealing with his mom is to agree with her, but then do whatever he wants anyway. You should have this selection of wine and beer. Okay, doesn't choose her selections. You should decorate the tables this way. Okay, doesn't do it. You should say this during the vows. Okay, ignores it. For a while, this method worked. However, since my grandmother felt like she was getting her way, she became bolder. She started calling caterers and florists behind my parents' backs to change their plans. Fortunately, my parents had warned their vendors in advance, telling them not to make any changes unless they approved them personally. After a few heated arguments over the phone, my dad finally put his foot down. He warned her that if she kept interfering, she would be uninvited. That seemed to shut her down at least for a little while. Instead of bothering the wedding vendors, she redirected her energy toward nagging my dad. She nagged him so much that he ended up in the emergency room twice due to severe migraines. The wedding day disaster. Finally, the big day arrived, and my parents were determined to have their wedding their way. My grandmother could mutter all the petty remarks she wanted, but she wasn't going to ruin this day for my mom. Or so they thought. If you've been following along, you can probably see where this is going. She showed up in a wedding dress. Not just any wedding dress, the exact one she had wanted my mom to wear. And, as if that weren't bad enough, she had an entire group of friends also show up in wedding dresses. My dad took one look at them, turned around, and had her friends escorted out. My grandmother was allowed to stay because kicking her out would have caused an even bigger scene, possibly involving law enforcement. However, she was banned from appearing in any wedding photos. That was my dad's first wedding. My mom has since said that divorcing my father was one of the greatest reliefs of her life because it meant she never had to deal with his mother again. My dad, on the other hand, is stuck with her for life. So is his new wife, my stepmom. My dad's second marriage. If you thought my grandmother would have learned her lesson after the first wedding, you'd be wrong. This time, I got a front row seat to the chaos. My dad remarried when I was about 15. My stepmom, a wonderful and patient woman, was in her late 30s. She was kind but firm, and I had no issues with her. But my grandmother, oh, she was livid. From the start, she made it clear that she did not approve. First, she said my dad was moving too fast despite the fact that he had been divorced from my mom for nearly a decade. Then, she complained that my stepmom was too old to have children. She told my dad, "If you want more kids, you should find someone younger. She's past her prime." My stepmom, overhearing this, just smiled and said, "That's fine by me. I don't want kids anyway." That shut my grandmother up for about 5 minutes. Wedding planning, round 2. This time, my dad and stepmom decided to keep things small. They planned a simple ceremony with just close friends and family, followed by a dinner at a nice restaurant. No extravagant decorations, no massive guest list, just a quiet, intimate wedding. My grandmother hated it. She started nitpicking every single detail, claiming it wasn't proper. She insisted on a bigger venue, a live band, and a full-blown reception. She even tried to get them to have a church wedding, despite the fact that my stepmom wasn't religious. My dad, once again, responded with his usual okay and then ignored her. Since she couldn't control the wedding itself, she tried to interfere in other ways. First, she insisted that I wear a specific dress she had picked out. It was hideous, a bright pink, frilly monstrosity with too many layers and an overwhelming amount of lace. I politely declined and chose my own dress. She pouted but moved on. Then, she tried to convince my dad to change the seating arrangement so that she could sit next to him during the ceremony. He refused. At this point, she was getting desperate. The final meltdown. The day of the wedding arrived, and everyone was on edge, waiting for my grandmother's inevitable meltdown. She didn't disappoint. She showed up wearing black. Not just any black dress, a full-length, lacy, morning gown, complete with a black veil. She looked like she was attending a funeral rather than a wedding. When my dad saw her, he sighed and said, "Mom, what are you doing?" She dramatically responded, "I am mourning the loss of my son." My stepmom, bless her heart, just laughed and said, "At least she dressed for the occasion." The ceremony went on as planned, but not without my grandmother making passive-aggressive comments under her breath. At one point, when the officiant asked if anyone objected, she coughed loudly. Everyone ignored her. During dinner, she refused to eat and sat there with her arms crossed, scowling at everyone. She muttered about how my dad had betrayed her, how this wedding was a disgrace, and how my stepmom was stealing her son. My dad, as usual, let it go in one ear and out the other. Finally, when it was time for speeches, she stood up and said, "I just want to say that I hope you both find happiness, though I doubt you will." Then she sat back down like she had just delivered the most heartfelt blessing in the world. There was a long, awkward silence before my stepmom raised her glass and said, "Well, that was something. Cheers, everyone." And just like that, the party moved on. The aftermath. After the wedding, my grandmother refused to speak to my dad for a few weeks, claiming he had betrayed the family. Eventually, she got over it at least enough to call him and complain about other things. She still doesn't like my stepmom, but at this point, I don't think my stepmom cares. She and my dad are happy, and that's all that matters. As for me, I've learned 2 things from watching my dad's weddings. Never let anyone, especially a controlling mother-in-law, dictate your wedding. If someone shows up in black at your wedding, just roll with it and enjoy the chaos. And that, my friends, is how my grandmother tried and failed to ruin 2 weddings. Story 3. Preface. So this happened back in 2007. I think it's been a long time. In my comment history, a local Redditor posted in r/Ottawa talking about hit and run and asked for stories of people having it all worked out. Posting my story brought back some euphoric feelings of vindication and justice being served. I felt like I should share a more elaborate version of what happened. So this happened in Ottawa at Bruce Pit, an off-leash dog park located in the West End. The wife, girlfriend at the time, we got married in 2009. We lived close enough to this park, and brought our pupper there often. The parking lot, it's just a gravel, uneven mess that has no lines or direction to park. But people follow some sense of normalcy when parking. Cast. Wife, Sparky, not really in the story, but that was his name. Crown prosecutor, I'm in Canada. Police officer, hit and run offender, witness. An ex-copper, we have a few of these. Not sure if it's ex-copper or not that represented the hit and run offender, but it's one of those. So not an attack on ex-copper or any of those businesses. They're legitimate and do a good job. Story. On to the story. So we parked at Bruce Pit just like any other time. Nothing abnormal about it. My wife and I went on with our long walk and playtime for Sparky. When we were leaving, we were heading back to the car. I was putting Sparky into the back seat and had seen a piece of paper on my window, but thought it was just advertising. My wife picked it up and gasped, saying, "Someone hit the car." 2006 Kia Sportage at the time. I reply with, "How what?" and proceed to check. The front driver's side bumper was all scraped up from side to front. Lights and bumper were scraped. I read the note which said, "Saw someone hit your car. Call me if you need to 613-XXX-YI." I'm like, wow, someone witnessed what happened. That's nice. Busy place after all. At this point, I called the police non-emergency line. My wife and I were waiting for the police officer to arrive, looking at the entrance when one walked right up to us. Turns out the police officer was walking her dog with her partner on break. That's when I noticed the officer's car in the back of the parking area. I explained what happened. The officer took my information and my wife's. She then stepped away and went to call the witness. She came back and said she has more investigating to do and to talk with the witness more, but she'll get back to us at home. No problem. My wife and I head out. We drive to get gas, and there's a local charity washing cars. So we had them wash ours, skipping the damaged part. Got home, took pictures, called insurance, etc. Hours later, the police officer shows up and gives us a copy of the report and tells us that the hit-and-run offender got a ticket for failure to report an accident. $200 fine. We were like, cool, all's good. My insurance fixed the car, parts and labor total to about $2,300. I didn't pay anything, so not out of pocket for anything. All's good. I'm off on the timeline of events, but I remember a few months later getting a call from the Crown prosecutor, asking more details of everything that happened and telling me I'll be getting a summons to appear, as the hit-and-run offender was contesting the ticket. Rightfully so. A failure to report accident looks bad, very bad, for insurance, and they could skyrocket their premiums or even outright cancel them. In any case, a week or two later, I get the summons to appear in a couple of months. The day arrives, I head to court with my wife. We get into the courtroom, and they have other tickets being contested that day, speeding, parking, etc. In the courtroom is the Crown prosecutor, police officer, witness, ex-copper, and other randoms that are on the schedule that day. I brought my invoice with me and gave it to the prosecutor. They run through the other people quickly. Basically, it's them just saying not guilty, and since the ticket issuing officer is not present, they get off. Funny side story. One guy pleads guilty with reason. The judge says, "Are you sure?" It goes back and forth 2 or 3 times, to which the prosecutor just informs them to plead not guilty. They do, and they get off. Funny to see that. On to our case. That's when I learned and saw who the witness was, and that hit-and-run offender didn't show up, but their representative did. The police officer and I are witnesses and asked to wait outside the courtroom to be called upon. Debbie goes first. My wife is in the gallery listening. I'm outside and thank the officer again for her work in this case and whatnot. Several minutes go by and I get called in. I step in, take the oath, and sit down. I've never been a witness or been in court really as a plaintiff or defendant, so it was all new to me. The prosecutor asks me a bunch of questions relating to everything, and brings up the invoice that I supplied to her. The ex-copper takes offense to the invoice being entered last minute. They go back and forth and argue its admissibility, and the Crown prosecutor wins that part. Can't go into details about that. I'm an IT guy. Legal jargon is very limited, so she asks about it and confirms the amount for repair, which was $2,300. The ex-copper's turn. He brings up the invoice and asks how much it says for parts. I say $400. Again, I don't remember exactly, but I remember it was well under the $750 limit for the ticket. I'll explain that later. He's done questioning me. The prosecutor takes another turn and reiterates how much the total was. That's it. A very limited testimony on my part. Really not much other than, I called the police to report the accident and then got my car repaired, etc. The officer is next. It gets interesting here. So the officer testifies pretty much to what's gone on so far, but goes on to say, after speaking to the witness, she got the van's license plate and headed to their place of residence. She informed the officer that the offender hit my car, swiping the entire side of her van. My car moved a few inches as a result. Got out of her van, assessed the damages, got back in her van and left. The officer went to the offender's house and knocked on the door. The offender answered the door and said, "Oh, I know why you're here." The officer asked to see the vehicle, to which the offender says her husband is out with it at the moment, but should be back shortly. Moments later, the husband arrives with dramatic dum 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 sound here, a van, same make, model and year. The police officer asks where his van is, as the license plates are different. He says it's at a friend's house. He leaves to fetch his van. Arrives shortly after with his van. Big scratch from the right front wheel well to the back. The officer saw red paint transfer, my car was red, and documented the incident further. At this point issued the failure to report an accident ticket. Ex-coppers turn to ask questions and asks how did you not know the offender wouldn't be calling the police to report the accident when she got home? The great answer was, she had about 1 hour and 30 minutes to call from the time I called in to report the accident to when the officer showed up to the offender's door. All sorts of stuff to try and his client off right. I don't fault the ex-copper at all, this is his job. That's it with testimony really. Now on to closing remarks and statements. The prosecutor goes first and points out the damage, the testimony, etc. Normal stuff. Ex-copper's turn. He tries to dismiss based on the ticket's address. While there is no physical number, the address was listed as Bruce Pitt on Cedarview RD on the ticket. Ex-copper argues it was 175 Cedarview. Judge says, okay, let's make an amendment to the ticket to show the proper address. Prosecutor okay with that? The prosecutor answers, yes, so didn't get the ticket dismissed on that. Ex-copper then iterates the charge of failure to report an accident is for damage in excess of $750. Judge squashes that and says overall the damage is $1,300. And that's just to the other vehicle, not even her own, which is likely more. He argues and it goes back and forth trying to claim all sorts of things. The ex-copper tries all sorts of things, but the judge is having none of it. Judgment time. The judge has heard it all and decides the charge will remain, and in fact increased the amount of the fine to maximum, $500. The ex-copper pleads with the judge to lower the fine, as the offender's insurance will definitely be a bigger hit. Judge replies with, and I will not forget this last part, the offender's relationship with her insurance is personal. What they decide to do with the outcome of this charge is a personal matter and not of this court's. And that's it. A $200 fine, increased to $500, could have been much worse for the offender, as I think they were working to deceive the officer, but the officer showed up before they could effectively finish the cover-up. I really wish I knew if and how much the offender's insurance went up. A friend had lesser charges, unrelated to a hit and run, a few years ago, and his insurance just bounced him completely, and he has to be on high-risk insurance now, paying almost 4 times as much. The feeling of winning at the end and being vindicated with the judge increasing the fine to the max was euphoric. Rewriting this the other day in a comment brought back those feelings, and writing this now brings it back too. Justice was served for me that day, and it feels great even to this day, 13 years later. I certainly hope you enjoyed the story, and I did try to remember it the best I could. The ex-copper's arguments at the end may have happened while I was testifying as well. It's just been so long, I don't remember all the intricate details. Story 4. Entitled Woman Yells at Me Over My Tics. Then snatches my wallet to try and find proof of mental disorder causing tics. Hi everybody. So this is a bit of a background on me. I don't have Tourette's, however I do tic, twitch, and fidget a lot due to my mental health disorders. Borderline personality disorder being the main contributor to my tics, and I have gotten used to it. Much therapy, much meds. But when I'm in a public place, I tend to be more stressed out. Since this was when I didn't have my service dog at the time. Reminder that I was, and still am, a minor. Also, this is one of my first times posting, so be nice. So this day was just an ordinary day, and I was out at my local mall to buy a present for one of my friends. Now I had already had encounters with entitled people about my piercings scaring their kids, me being out in slight cosplay with friends, because I do that, etc. etc. Now I thought today wasn't going to have any sort of encounters because COVID in my area was nuts. But boy, was I wrong as heckity. I was waiting in line in front of an older woman in the store I was in. Hint, very large bookstore that starts with a bar and ends with a blee. And I had a selection of some of my favorite books, and the present for my friend. I was having slight trouble holding the books since the store was a bit crowded, and it was around the time I ate, so I was a bit hungry, and I do get a bit more stressed when hungry. So in that sense, my arm was jolting slightly along with my fingers, my head jolting to the side slightly as well. These are very common. I hardly verbally tic, so it's usually physical movements. My main strategy is to curl my toes, which does help somewhat, but I still had to set my books to the side to readjust it in my more secure arm. This woman approached me asking if I needed any help, to which I cleared my throat to decline. She asked me if I had some form of Tourette's, in which I shook my head no, which normally would result in an "oh, then what's wrong?" in a polite manner. But again, I was wrong as heckity. She full-on did this very angry huff before saying, "Then why are you faking this? Is it for attention or something? Do you want people to feel bad for you?" Which caught me so off guard. The following conversation went something like this. "I'm sorry. You heard me. Why are you faking your tics then?" "Ma'am, that's really not something I'd prefer to tell an absolute stranger." "Well, tell me anyway. You're a part of the problem for faking disabilities." Me, staring at the woman, "I'm not fakin'." She then pulled her mask down. "Did you just talk back to me? My daughter has Tourette's. I've done my research. I understand your daughter has Tourette's. However, I just want to buy my books and go home as fast as possible. Also, please pull up your mask. Don't you tell me what to do. I need proof that you aren't faking this." Me, visibly uncomfortable and backing away from her. "Ma'am, please, I just want to buy my books." The cashier, who wasn't there before. "Next person I can help." I quickly rushed over with my books to check out, pulling my wallet out with my still shaking hand. The cashier gave me a smile under his mask as he scanned my books. The woman was rushing over to yell at me, snatching my wallet right out of my hand before going through it, snatching my ID out of it as well. I was in shock, so I stood there and just stared in utter shock as this woman rummaged through my stuff. Thankfully, I snapped out of it and took it back as the cashier yelled at her, since I had to show a photo ID for my card and saw I was a minor. At this point, I was on the verge of tears and ready to call my mom to come pick me up to take me home instead of me riding the city transit. I kinda blanked out for the rest of the encounter, but I do remember getting a free book and the woman being taken away by security. Sorry, this wasn't really that interesting, but I do remember getting home safely. And that same month, we got my bestest friend, also known as my service dog Baz. Story 5. I'm stretching the parent part of this sub to cover fur babies, As we are childless at the moment, our dog is sort of our practice child. So entitled Pet Parents Story Incoming. Backstory. My dog, Stormy, a 4-year-old female pit bull, black lab, chow chow, Australian shepherd mutt mix, is a very good girl. She loves other dogs, people, children, etc. She's well known in our small subdivision, and many of our neighbors with dogs will bring their dog up to the fence/deck railing to let their dog say hello through the fence, which is okay. We hired a dog walker, Nell, to come take Stormy for walks Monday to Friday while we're working. Stormy gets a 15-25 minute walk with Nell, and Nell is an absolute professional. Nell does have a contract and rules though. Nell's time with our dog is dedicated to getting her walked and letting her go potty, cleaning up after her, and then Nell needs to be off to the next customer. Nell does not let our dog interact with other dogs during their time together, because she doesn't know whose dog is a jerk or angel, vaccinated, or the temperament training style of their owners. She also has liability insurance that talks about not taking risks with other dogs. So when she comes across someone who wants to say hi, she says, "Hey, I'm really sorry, we can't stay and hang out due to liability and time." Usually, that's the end of it and people respect her request. Except last week with 2 of my entitled pet parent neighbors. Cast. Nell, our good dog walker. Stormy, my goodest girl dog. Karen, entitled pet parent #1 who does not have my cell phone number. And Tabitha, entitled pet parent #2 who does have my cell phone number. Karen is an older lady who kind of rubs several of the neighbors wrong by not cleaning up after her dog's waste, and also doing things like cutting other people's shrubs down like 6 houses away. I've always gotten more strange vibes from her. I avoid in-depth conversations and just keep my hellos brief. Tabitha is nice to me, but I've always had a this lady might have issues or be entitled vibe from her. I've always kept my contact with most of the neighbors pretty brief in general, because having neighbors you don't like, I've heard, can be quite stressful. Tabitha bothers my husband though. She's very pushy, like, "Oh, my dog wants to play, so I'm going to let my dog into your fenced yard for a few minutes." Husband: "No, sorry, we don't have time, I've got to get back to work." Followed by an insane amount of pouting, arguing and complaining from Tabitha. This is Nell and my story from last Wednesday with 2 entitled dog parents. Nell was taking Stormy for a walk, and Karen snuck up behind her with her dog. Good dog, much older, somewhat indifferent to people or dogs, but good dog all the same. Nell has previously asked Karen to keep her distance, so when Karen snuck up behind her, it felt very intentional and disrespectful. Nell said her usually, no, we can't hang out, liability and time. Karen argued with her and said, "I said it was fine, so it's fine." Nell tells me that she was almost back at our house, but felt compelled to turn around and quickly leave, going the opposite direction. No big deal, Stormy just gets a double walk, and Nell avoids an awkward confrontation any further. Nell hasn't gotten very far, and is walking past another neighbor's Tabitha's house. Tabitha says, "Oh, is that Stormy?" And Nell says yes, thinking the lady wants to pet Stormy, which is okay, and Tabitha says, "Oh great, hold on for a moment," so Nell waits, thinking Tabitha might want to give Stormy a treat, also okay, but no, Tabitha wants to get her dog, another good girl, out of the house and let Stormy and her dog play. Nell says, "Hey, sorry, don't really have time," and liability insurance says no other doggy visits. Tabitha loses her mind and starts screaming at Nell, "How dare you, I'm going to report you," amongst other things. I'm at work while all this is going down and completely unaware until I get a text message from Tabitha saying, "Your dog walker was so rude. She wouldn't even let my dog say hi to Stormy when both dogs wanted to do it. She wouldn't even stop and talk to me, telling me she has to get going." I explained to Tabitha that it was by design and per the contract for safety and liability reasons, as Nell doesn't know whose dog is a jerk or an angel, and Nell has a schedule of other customers, and Nell was really nice and professional. I would absolutely recommend her. Tabitha argued with me some more about how Nell should have tried to get her business then, and even said we should fire our dog walker and she'll walk Stormy for free. I just wished her a nice day and left it alone with Tabitha. I sent Nell a text message shortly after. Heard about the thing with my neighbor. I respect and appreciate your policy on no doggy greetings. I understand you have safety concerns and time limits, and I explained those to Tabitha. I hope you weren't uncomfortable. Nell proceeded to call me and tell me about Karen and Tabitha's interactions. What a day for our poor dog walker, but thankfully she's got tough skin, and our support and appreciation of course. I reinforced that we agree with her policies, respect her time, and to let us know if she needed any further support from us.